Shalom and welcome, brothers and sisters. Thank you for coming to this video, and I really appreciate your time. I really do. Thank you. Who is the prophet like unto Moshe, like unto Moses? Now, many Christians and Messianics believe it's pointing to no other than Jesus or Yeshua. Islam believes that it's Muhammad, and I'm not here to argue either or. I'm here to give our side, the Jewish side, Israel, our side, and our take based on the scripture itself. And in the end, you have to decide whether or not this is correct or not. It must be based on the Hebrew scriptures. Let us begin. Deuteronomy chapter 18 verses 15 through 19 refers to Yehoshua or Joshua in the immediate context of all subsequent prophets after him. Let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 18 verse 15 and chapter 18 verse 18 closely. In verse 15 of Deuteronomy chapter 18, Moses is speaking here. It says, Yehovah, your Elohim, will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you. From your countrymen you shall listen to him. Okay, so now we need to establish the context of what it means to be like Moses. Verse 18 establishes this context concerning this particular chapter. Let's take a look at verse 18. God is speaking here. I will raise up a prophet from among their countrymen like you. He's speaking to Moses, like Moses. And I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. So what does it mean to be like Moses in this context? It's very simple. All that it means is that the prophet will speak the words that God commands him. That's all. Now, what prophet do we know in Tanakh who fits this description? Every prophet in Tanakh speaks the word of Elohim. That's the definition of a prophet. So who does this apply to? The answer is all the prophets. But in the immediate context, it applies to Yehoshua, Joshua, since he was Moses' successor. The book of Joshua gives us explicit proof of this. You don't have to believe me. Let's take a look at the text itself. Joshua chapter 1 verse 5. No man shall stand up before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so shall I be with you. I will not weaken my grasp on you, nor will I abandon you. And then in verse 16 of Joshua chapter 1, it says, And they answered Joshua, meaning Israel, All that you have commanded us we shall do, and wherever you send us we shall go. Verse 17, the next verse. Just as we, meaning Israel, obeyed Moses in everything, so shall we obey you. Only that Yehovah your Elohim be with you, as he was with Moses. Again, as he, God, was with Moses. This is what Israel declares to Yehoshua, Joshua. Very, very clear. Joshua chapter 3, verse 7. And Yehovah said unto Yehoshua, Joshua, This day I will begin to make you great in the sight of all of Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so shall I be with you. Joshua chapter 4 verse 14. On that day Yehovah made Joshua great in the sight of all of Israel, and they feared him as they had feared Moses all the days of his life. Joshua chapter 11 verse 15. As Yehovah commanded Moses his servant, so did Moses command Yehoshua, Joshua, and so did Joshua. He left nothing undone of all that Yehovah commanded Moses. I would argue that there is no prophet in the entire Tanakh who is compared to Moshe as much as Joshua. No one. Not even close. If you can show me otherwise, I'm willing to listen. Go ahead and state it in the comment section. It's just not the case. Now, if you bring up Deuteronomy chapter 34 verse 10, which often comes up, essentially arguing that Joshua could not be a prophet like Moses, mentioned in Deuteronomy 18 verse 18, which I know that comes up a lot, because it says this in Deuteronomy chapter 34 verse 10, "And there was no other prophet who arose in Israel like Moses, whom Yahweh knew face to face." The part that I have capitalized here in my studies here and starred is significant, which is whom Yahweh knew face to face. It's significant because it provides a different context as to what it means to be like Moses. Very different compared to Deuteronomy chapter 18 verse 18. In Deuteronomy chapter 18 verse 18, the context was simply that in order for a prophet to be like Moses, all they had to do was speak all that God put into their mouths. This fits the general description of every prophet after Moses. However, Deuteronomy chapter 34 verse 10 is speaking about being like Moses in a very specific manner. Exodus chapter 33 verse 11 highlights the fact that Moses had a very unique relationship with God that no other prophet had. His ability to speak with God face to face. For example, Exodus chapter 33 verse 11, "Then Yahweh would speak to Moses face to face, as a man would speak to his companion. And he would return to the camp, but his attendant Joshua, the son of Nun, a lad, would not depart from the tent when Moses went." Remember, this is the context of Deuteronomy chapter 34 verse 10. The context of being like Moses is that no prophet like Moses was able to speak to God face to face. For this context, I would agree that Joshua and all other prophets are not like Moses. I would agree with that in the context of Deuteronomy chapter 34 verse 10. But Deuteronomy chapter 18 verse 18 does not speak concerning this context. For to be like Moses in the context of Deuteronomy chapter 18 verse 18 is simply to speak the words that God puts into their mouths. Joshua and all other true prophets certainly are like Moses in this sense. Thus, they are being spoken of in the context of Deuteronomy chapter 18 verse 18. Okay, we can also use grammatical consistency to demonstrate that Deuteronomy chapter 18 verse 18 does not refer to only one prophet, but rather the general concept of prophets in the plural who succeeded Moses. Let's look at the verses again, okay? Deuteronomy chapter 18 verse 17, "And Yahweh said to me, they have done well in what they have spoken." Deuteronomy chapter 18 verse 18, the next verse, "I will set up a prophet for them from among their brothers like you, and I will put my words into his mouth. He will speak to them all that I command him." Deuteronomy chapter 18 verse 19, "And it will be that whoever does not hearken to my words that he speaks in my name, I will require it of him." These verses describe the prophet like Moses, who you deem to be the one singular individual. You who is a Christian or a Messianic or any other, you believe it's who you believe is the Messiah, Jesus or Yeshua. Knowing this, let's keep reading on. Let's just assume you're right. Let's keep reading on. Let's see what it says. Verse 20 of chapter 18 of Deuteronomy. "But the prophet who intentionally speaks a word in my name, which I did not command him to speak, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die." In verse 21, "Now if you say to yourself, how will we know the word that Yahweh did not speak?" Verse 22, "If the prophet speaks in the name of Yahweh, and the thing does not occur and does not come back about, that is the thing that Yahweh did not speak. The prophet has spoken on his own merit, presumptuously. He spoke his own words, plain and simple. You shall not be afraid of him." So the fear tactics don't work. If it doesn't match with the Torah, we must not fear the words of this so-called prophet. Shalom, everyone.